listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor, and I'm with my son today, and we're going to talk about a checklist. And I came up with this idea of a checklist because I gave my book, it's around 120 pages, to Stuart McLean, and he had one suggestion. He says, well, what people need is something short where they can review their package, email, direct mail, doesn't matter, and determine, hey, what do they need to do? So I came up with 16 things I could fit on one page, because if you have too long of checklists, I think people, they miss things. So these were the things I picked as the most important. I could be wrong about some as being, I'm sure I left things out, but this is the 16 I came up with. If you use a teaser on your outer envelope, does it engage the target audience? And often it doesn't. And of course, I'd say that's true of emails as well. One I mentioned before was there's a movement afoot to defend liberty. Now, Jonathan, do you know what that's about?
No idea.
Well, it was about the Bush-Cheney administration was using the Patriot Act to eavesdrop on private phone conversations. So I came up with a teaser I think would at least identify those that might be interested, the target audience. Did you know Dick Cheney can legally listen to your phone calls? That you would know what it's about at least, right?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. Okay, let me give you another example. It's from the other side of the political spectrum. The signer of this letter works in the Trump White House still, I think. They change a lot. It's fairly prominent. This is the teaser they came up with. Your copy of HJ Res 56 enclosed. Please sign and return in 72 hours. Now, do you know what that's about?
Nope. I have no idea. I could figure out, but I'm not going to put effort into that.
You'd have to look at Thomas. You'd have to be on Capitol Hill or to be looking at that. And it was about same-sex marriage. And I looked in the letter, and it had. I came up with, will you co-sign the federal marriage amendment? Last chance to stop same-sex marriage. That was in their thing. So at least you know what it is. It's not going to attract everybody, but the audience it's interested in would at least know what it's about, and the teaser would be beneficial at least in attracting your audience. The second line there is it's not as bad. I see a lot of people do that. Please sign and return in 72 hours. I think it's been overdone. And I like what Jerry Hunsinger says. He says, don't indulge in idiot instructions such as open immediately, open carefully, immediate reply requested, because it's been overdone. I like that. My second suggestion here on your checklist is if you use a personal approach, be consistent throughout the package. And I'll give you an example. I saw a pink envelope. It was supposed to be a personal appeal from a woman, but it was in a number 10 window. Now, you don't have to know a lot about stationery to know that that's not what they sell. I mean, that's a window envelope, number 10, is for business, or certainly not personal. So it gives it away. Another pet peeve of mine is from the desk of on like 8.5 by 14 or even 8.5 by 11. That's always from the desk of supposed to be personal correspondence, maybe 7 by 10 or even smaller. It probably doesn't hurt your mailing that much, but it just is misguided. My third suggestion is, and this is a really important one, fire your big guns first. Do not bury your lead. And grab your reader. Let me talk about that. Perhaps the best example of that is an interview I saw of Carl Galletti on Michael Sinoff. He interviews a lot of people. You can go to michaelsinoff.com. He has I don't know if it's still available, but he's interviewed a lot of experts. And he was talking about the great Frank Capra. Have you ever heard of Frank Capra? He's before your time a bit.
I think I have. He's the Catch Me If You Can, right?
I don't know about that. I know he was just a great movie producer in the day. Anyway, he had this one movie that was going to be back in the day they would test it. In other words, they let people go see the movie for free to get reaction, and people wouldn't, even though it was a free movie, they'd walk out. And what he determined was the movie started too slow. So he took the first 2 reels out. Back then, a movie might have, 8 or 9 reels to it, and then it was fine. And I think a lot of letters are that way. They just kind of start slowly. And if you're somebody who has that problem, you might ask somebody what your lead should be. It's often on page 2. That's something that you should get help on. But I've seen a lot of letters and emails that just don't get to the point. They, for whatever reason. The fourth is use short paragraphs, simple words, and white space to make it easy to read. This isn't controversial. I think most people who have any experiences know this, yet I see it violated often, so it's something worth remembering. Number 5, does your letter focus on the suffering of one or a few rather than millions? And one of the most interesting times I saw this tested was they had this successful package about a bear that had been abused by some biker gang. Really sad, and had been in a control package for this animal group for many years. And then they came up with an idea, which I thought was clever, to mail a buffalo nickel. Unfortunately, they changed the teaser, to something like millions of buffaloes were decimated or something like that, and it just killed the results. Because you went from the emotion of one to millions. Anytime you have millions, it's such a big number, it's just not as emotional. So that killed the mailing. Number 6, do you use the best motivators for the niche? This is a common mistake. I will say in people's defense, you should look for something to adapt from one niche to another. So I get how somebody could make this mistake, but you might have something that's very good in one niche. For instance, guilt or the desire for reciprocity. Guilt might work, like take Catholic mailings, for instance. They almost always, we had Jim Manerick and we talked about it, they almost always have the rosary, or sometimes they have a coin, like of an angel. When the Pope was visiting the United States, he'd have the Pope. And people feel more of an obligation. You gave me something, I give you something. Probably the best example of reciprocity I've read is in the book Influence by Cialdini. And he talks about how a German soldier in World War I, it's hard to attack with a big unit, but individuals could sometimes, they could go to the other trench unnoticed. And he was about to capture or kill this French guy, but the Frenchman offered him his bread and cheese that he was eating. So he felt so guilty he couldn't capture or kill him. He took it or whatever and left, So that gives you an idea of the power of reciprocity. If you do a favor for somebody, they feel an obligation to do it back. Even so, it doesn't work as well in other things. For instance, like a nickel, that might be an example of engaging reciprocity. If you're mailing some political advocacy group where anger or outrage is more of a motive or fear, then the nickel's probably not going to work. A museum with recognition, a nickel might be a little cheap unless it was about Monticello, with Jefferson, because he's on there. I'm just trying to come up with an example where it might not be. But you have to think about why if the motivator you're trying to use, like a matching check, or sometimes people offer a check, for instance. Well, that's going to work well maybe for a group that helps veterans, but maybe not for a museum. In fact, I know it was tested recently. It didn't, so I wasn't surprised. So know what niche you're in and what kind of motivators work best in that niche. A quarter obviously did work well for Mount Vernon, but that's because he's on the quarter. So there are exceptions. A senior group, they're probably not interested in recognition like a museum. So a lot of times people use the wrong motivator for the niche they're in. Number 7, if you use them, do your photos reinforce the overall message of the package? Now, I'm a big believer in photos. I know you've seen a lot of the photos that worked in animal mailings, and you would say most of them have good pictures, wouldn't you say, or emotional pictures,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, very much so.
You might have an after photo where I'm not saying that attractive photos can't be used in there at all, but it's usually a painful photo, and it's because the pain causes people to feel like they should give. Pain leads to action, and that's why those photos, even though they're controversial, do work. I mean, it's not the only way to raise money. I'm not saying that, but painful photos. Sometimes outrage, anger over something. You had people. The alt-right was marching in Charlottesville. If you could show that, some pictures there, and that might outrage anger a certain audience. Or there was the protesters in Durham, that might irritate somebody else. Those are kind of examples. Where I see people mess up is I got this one envelope, had a picture of a bunch of people in T-shirts, and they all had different expressions. And I couldn't figure out what it was trying to do. So sometimes pictures, they help, other times they don't help. So anyway, it's something to think about. Do you give your donor permission to believe through testimonials and news articles? The permission to believe, that's a concept I read in Roland Kuhneholm's book. It's important. It is not the primary reason people give, though. It's something that you want part of your package. If you have a prominent endorsement, you have testimonials from people. If you've been a TV news story on you, that kind of thing. Absolutely use it. People want to know that you're reputable, that you have that you're doing the things you claim. I mean, that's very valuable. But it's not the primary reason people give. It just needs to be a component of what you do. Number 9, do you repeat key points for skimmers? Is your package skimmer friendly? Earlier I talked about Craig Capp and how he would give islands. He did a lot of subheads. He made it very easy to read. In fact, just by reading the subheads, you could get a pretty good idea of what his mailing was about. Might be enough for some people. I don't know. But you do want to make it skimmable. Now, my problem with a lot of what English teachers are taught, and I noticed this with your writing, it's really hard to read because how many paragraphs? You're supposed to have like 5 or 6 paragraphs? How do they teach you?
5 paragraphs. One of them being an opening and the other conclusion.
Yeah, I mean that's not the best way as far as response, and the way direct mail people do it are trying to get response. So it gives you an idea of what the consumer would like, if you will, is to make a paragraph for every thought. And that means you can have 1-line paragraphs, you can have 3-line paragraphs. But you certainly don't want, 20-line paragraphs or even over 6 or 7 lines. You need to break it up, make it easy, a lot of white space, as I said. Make it skimmer friendly. So a lot of the things you've been taught in school, a lot of people that are actually the most, the English major you'd have to unlearn a lot of that if you're going to be a direct mail or email copywriter. Number 10, you give an urgent reason to make a donation today. You use dollar justification to stretch gifts, and you make it easy to donate. Let me talk about each of those. The stretch gift's pretty easy. You remember we were at the grand opening of the museum in Gettysburg, the Seminary Ridge, 150th.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
And obviously, I emphasized 150. I put it on the outer envelope in gold. I put it, and we got a lot of $150 gifts, so it's not a surprise. If you were mailing for the World War I Museum in Kansas City, 100th anniversary makes sense, So that's kind of a stretch gift. I mean, it's not for everybody, but for a lot of people who might ordinarily give $50, perhaps they'll stretch to that. Urgency, obviously, that's always important. You want to be as specific as possible. And make it easy to donate. Well, you think, obviously you want to have a reply envelope of some sort. It's found that it's a bad idea if they have to fold the reply form many times. That actually hurts response, believe it or not. So do you make it easy to donate? Stretch gifts, urgency, very important. Number 11, do you flatter the donor? Do you make him or her the hero? Or is your copy all about the group? And so often particularly when there's like anniversary or something. People, they just want to talk about themselves, but you really want to make your donor feel good. That's a very important concept. Make your donor feel good, and that's why you want to concentrate on them. Tell them, give them credit. You want to do it in a credible way, but you want to, as much as possible, make them the hero. Is your technique or involvement device credible? Is it appropriate for your audience? Sometimes, again, we were talking about niches. They're not. Do you share the signer's story, or is your letter one that anybody could sign? Well, this is a common mistake. People don't really ask, what is the signer's connection? Obviously, sometimes it's obvious. If you have Buzz Aldrin, the last only living, man to walk on the moon, you know what his connection is to, say, an aviation museum. But sometimes, the person you may not know. So you need to ask. And it's a real flaw if anybody could sign your letter, because you really want to share their experiences. You want to personalize it, and you want more you and I copy. You don't want to we, talking about the group. People are more likely to give to an individual than a group. So even if it is a group that's mailing, like say a museum, you still want to make it seem like it's from that person. And that's what story. And I've tested this, so it's not just a conjecture here. Number 14, are you as specific as possible about what the money is needed for and when it's needed? If you use a deadline, it is in that sweet spot of enough but not too much time. And of course, deadlines can backfire if the mail gets dropped off real slowly and that kind of thing. And you have to have credibility with that too. But a number like we need to raise $19,415 in the next month to pay off this bill is a lot more credible than saying $20,000. You know that, that sounds like a real bill, $19,415. So, that's something to think about. Have you spent enough time writing the PS, or it is more of an afterthought? Now, I don't do this, so I've always been surprised, but they've done studies that most people actually go to the signer. They want to know who's signing it, and then they read the PS. Now, one reason I like to put who is in the letterhead, the signer of the thing, so they don't even have to go to page 4, because I'd rather them not. But even so, that's an interesting statistic. If most people are doing that, then the PS is obviously very important, because they're seeing who signed it, and then they're writing a PS. There's a lot of thought should go into that PS. Usually you restate what was the best argument in your letter, if there's an involvement device. But a lot of times there's some hidden benefit. That's what Mal Warwick recommends. That's something to consider too. But the PS is real important. You need a PS. But if you put a PS in your main letter, you don't want to do it in your lift letter. That's the advice. If you offer a back-end gift, this is the last one, and I see a lot of people not do this. You really want to sell it well. You want to show pictures of it. You want to describe it. You want to give, maybe it's a limited edition. Maybe you're only offering it for a certain period of time. Whatever it is, you don't want to, you really want to sell it well. You also want to make sure that people get the gift quickly. You don't want to start off your relationship on a bad footing. You know what I'm saying? You don't want them to think, one of the worst things you can do is take 6 to 8 weeks to send them their hat or whatever it is, and then send them future house mailings before they've gotten their gift. That's not a good way to start off your relationship. Another thing related to these back-end gifts, have you tested the dollar average? Do you know that they justify their costs? Because sometimes you can spend a lot of money on a premium, and it's not pulling its weight, and that's something to consider. Now, one thing I missed earlier that I wanted to talk about is the importance of leads. We were talking about that. I was reading Stephen. I can't think of the author, but he was talking about he spent. He's Stephen King, the science fiction. He spends months thinking about his leads. In other words, he thinks it's so important to start off with a good lead. And I'm not saying, you usually don't have time months, but he put such an emphasis. And I think one of them he liked was, he gave an example, postman rings twice, always rings twice, was I fell off the hay truck around noon, or they threw me off the hay truck around noon. You kind of have to say, hey, I got to find out about this. And that's what a good lead does. I got to read on. This interests me. And, that's such an important quality. Well, Jonathan, I appreciate you listening here mostly.
No problem.